I discovered my husband was secretly criticizing me online to help me improve. For months, the comments under my Instagram posts felt off. They weren't outright cruel, just sharp-edged suggestions. A different hairstyle might suit me better. Certain outfits didn't flatter my body type. My gym routine seemed unbalanced. First, they were easy to dismiss. Trolls exist, and blocking them had become routine. But the accounts kept popping up. Fresh usernames, 0 followers, blank profiles, and all of them followed only me. It started to gnaw at me. They were too consistent, too familiar. On a lazy Sunday afternoon, while Mark was napping on the couch, I started digging. Each account was the same. No content, no followers, but they were strangely invested in my appearance. A thought crept in, one I didn't want to entertain. What if it wasn't random? What if it was someone close? On impulse, I typed one of the usernames into the Instagram login screen. I tried Mark's usual throwaway password. The account opened, my husband. Mark was behind them. Every comment, every jab disguised as advice. The realization hit like ice water. This wasn't some stranger online. It was him. The account was right there, open on my screen, and every comment felt like a jab aimed directly at me. The words weren't random. They were precise, calculated, and uncomfortably specific. Suggestions about my hair, my outfits, the way I worked out. They weren't aggressive, but they cut deep because they felt personal. I checked the other accounts. Same password. Same pattern. All marked at my stomach tightened. This wasn't just a troll trying to get under my skin. This was my husband. I locked my phone and sat frozen for what felt like hours. Mark was still asleep on the couch, peaceful, completely unaware of the storm building inside me. I thought about shaking him awake and demanding answers right then. But I stopped myself. I needed to understand why. I needed to see if there was any sign, something I'd missed before. For the next week, I paid attention to every little thing he said. His casual remarks about my appearance, the way his eyes lingered on my phone screen when I scrolled through Instagram. Every offhand comment felt loaded now. One night, while I was brushing my teeth, he leaned against the bathroom door frame. You ever think about wearing your hair straight more often? It frames your face better. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I'd read almost the exact same comment from one of his fake accounts just days ago. That was it. I couldn't pretend anymore. The next evening, after dinner, I asked him to sit down. My hands were trembling as I spoke. Mark, I know about the accounts. His face shifted instantly. His smile dropped, and his expression went blank. He didn't even ask what accounts. The silence between us felt heavy, like the air had been sucked out of the room. Mark didn't say anything at first. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again as if he was trying to choose the right words. I waited, my pulse loud in my ears. Finally, he let out a breath and rubbed his face with both hands. I was just trying to help. Help. That word again. I stared at him, waiting for him to continue. I thought maybe if someone else said it, if it wasn't coming from me, you'd actually listen. His voice was quiet, almost defensive. You've been posting so much, and I see how much you care about what people say. I thought you'd take the advice if it came from someone else. Advice? That's what he was calling it. Do you have any idea how messed up that sounds? I asked. My voice was shaking, and I hated that it made me sound weak. Mark looked genuinely frustrated now, like I was the one who didn't understand. It's not like I was insulting you. I was just pointing out things that could make you better. Your hair, your outfits, your workouts, they're good, but they could be better. I thought you'd appreciate it if someone gave you honest feedback. I wanted to laugh, but the knot in my throat was too tight. This wasn't about honest feedback. This was about control. About him shaping me into some idealized version of what he thought I should look like. Did you ever stop to think how it might feel to read those comments? To have someone pick me apart over and over, day after day? Mark looked away, jaw clenched. He didn't answer. The silence stretched between us again. I realized then that he didn't think he'd done anything wrong. In his mind, he'd been helping me improve, helping me become better, but all I felt was small. Inspected. Picked apart by the one person who was supposed to make me feel safe. That night, I slept in the guest room. Mark didn't try to follow me. The guest room became my refuge. Nights stretched long and sleep barely came. Mark stayed on his side of the house, both of us trapped in a wordless routine that felt more like a ceasefire than a marriage. In the mornings, he'd be in the kitchen, making coffee as if nothing had happened. He'd glance up when I walked in, searching my face for some sign of forgiveness, but neither of us spoke about it. Conversations shrank to neutral topics: groceries, bills, schedules. Days passed and the troll accounts went silent. Then, they disappeared altogether. Deleted. At first, I felt a flicker of relief, but it was short-lived. Mark hadn't apologized or explained himself. Erasing the accounts felt more like a cleanup job than remorse. The weight of what he'd done lingered. Each comment he had posted came back to me, every carefully worded suggestion, every passive criticism. They weren't about improvement. They were about control, about molding me into an image he preferred. One evening, as I passed him in the hallway, his eyes met mine. He looked exhausted, regretful, but still silent. It was clear he thought his actions were justified, or at least excusable. I couldn't keep living in this strange limbo of avoidance and buried anger. That night, I locked the guest room door behind me. Lying there in the dark, I realized something had cracked between us, something fundamental. And no matter how much he tried to sweep away the evidence, the damage had already been done. I didn't know if this was something we could come back from, or if I even wanted to try. The silence became our language. Days bled into each other, and the space between Mark and me grew larger, more impenetrable. We still occupied the same house, passed each other in the kitchen, exchanged quiet acknowledgments. But we weren't us anymore. Mark stopped trying to fix things. Or maybe he realized there was nothing left to fix. His attempts at small talk dwindled, and eventually, we became two people sharing walls and little else. I started noticing how much of myself I'd lost over time, how my confidence had chipped away, piece by piece, without me realizing it. His comments, disguised as casual observations, had sunk deeper than I wanted to admit. The mirror became an enemy. Every outfit felt wrong. Every hairstyle felt inadequate. I wondered how long he'd been doing this. Did it start gradually, a comment here, a suggestion there? Or had he always been this person, hiding behind encouragement until it turned into quiet control? In the evenings, I stayed in the guest room. The lock on the door became my line in the sand, the physical representation of the emotional wall between us. He never tried to cross it. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I found myself staring at one of his hoodies in the pile. I couldn't explain the sudden wave of resentment that hit me. I threw it back into the basket and walked out of the room. The weight of the situation became impossible to ignore. There wasn't going to be a grand confrontation, no heated argument that would lead to catharsis. The silence said everything. I started thinking about leaving. Not in a dramatic, bags packed in the middle of the night way, but in a quiet, steady resolve kind of way. I could feel the end coming, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to clarity. This wasn't fixable. The idea of leaving settled into me slowly, like water seeping into cracked pavement. At first, it was just a fleeting thought, but it grew roots. Each quiet meal eaten across the table from Mark, each hollow exchange about groceries or bills, added weight to the inevitability of it all. I started to notice how empty our home felt, not just the rooms, but the air itself. Everything between us was silent, heavy, unresolved. Mark wasn't trying anymore, and neither was I. We were just existing near each other, avoiding eye contact, avoiding the truth. One afternoon, while he was out, I sat in our bedroom surrounded by half-packed bags. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was just done. There was no dramatic moment, no final straw, just a quiet understanding that this wasn't a marriage anymore. When Mark came home that evening, he paused in the doorway, his eyes moving between the bags and me. He didn't ask where I was going or why I was leaving. He just nodded, like he already knew this moment was coming. I don't remember what we said to each other. Maybe it was a few polite words, or maybe we just stood there in silence. But I do remember the look on his face, like he understood, even if he didn't want it. I spent that night at a friend's place, and the next day, I signed a lease for a small apartment across town. It wasn't much, just a quiet space with sunlight streaming through the windows, but it felt like mine. There was no closure, no neat ending tied up with a bow. Just distance. For weeks, I waited to feel regret, to miss him, to second-guess myself. But those feelings never came. Instead, there was relief, soft, quiet, and steady. I didn't know what came next, but for the first time in a long while, the reflection in the mirror felt like mine. The apartment became my sanctuary. It wasn't much, a small one-bedroom with mismatched furniture and dishes I bought secondhand, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. First, there was noise. Friends reaching out, texts from family asking if Mark and I were okay, even a few hesitant messages from him. I kept my replies short and polite. There was nothing left to say. Mark didn't fight me on the separation. There were no angry confrontations, no desperate pleas. Just quiet acceptance. I wondered if he ever truly understood the damage he caused or if, in his mind, he still thought he'd been helping me. I started to rebuild myself in small ways. I wore clothes because I liked them, not because I was trying to preemptively ward off criticism. I let my hair fall naturally without worrying whether it was flattering. I went to the gym for myself, without hearing phantom echoes of his comments in my head. One day, months later, I scrolled back through my old Instagram posts, the ones he'd commented on anonymously. I could still hear his voice in those words, but they felt distant now, like they belonged to a different life. I didn't block him on social media. I didn't need to. Whatever power he had over me was gone. Healing wasn't linear. There were moments when anger bubbled up, when I questioned whether I should have confronted him harder, demanded more answers. But in the end, I realized none of that would have changed the outcome. One evening, I posted a picture of myself, no filters, no carefully curated angles. Just me, standing in the golden light of my new apartment, smiling. For the first time in a long while, I felt whole. The likes rolled in, the comments were kind, but none of it mattered as much as the feeling I had when I hit post. This time, I wasn't looking for approval. I wasn't waiting for anyone to tell me I was enough, because, finally, I knew I was.